they decided to cut the rate 25 basis points. Does this actually mean anything? Well, if you're just looking at the monetary policy and how much someone is going to save or how much more money they're going to qualify for, then no. But if you consider something like herd mentality, maybe. There are two parts of herd mentality that people should be considering. There is, of course, the buyers. Now you're going to see a lot of people referencing very tiny polls with very inconsistent data, saying that there's just a bunch of people waiting on the sidelines to buy houses and lots of pent-up demand. Well, a 25 basis point cut isn't actually going to do anything. However, people rushing to the market is also probably not something that's going to happen nearly as much as people are saying it will. The other part of herd mentality is the amount of people selling houses right now that are looking to try and sell and liquidate their properties while they believe the market is hot, as well as people looking to sell their house and then buy a new house because if the rates are lower, it makes more sense to make that trade. There are some things that you are going to want to keep an eye on if you are selling your house or buying a house. If you're buying a house, don't rush to buy a house right now. If we do happen to hit new all-time highs in prices, which it might happen, don't be one of the people paying a new all-time high price for a specific category of housing. Inventory is of course high. It is piling up pretty quick. This announcement is not going to change that. If anything, this is probably going to make more people list their houses. Now, theoretically, this should put downward pressure on prices, and it might do that. However, if there's more buyers and more activity, there's a good chance that we might technically see a new all-time high price. I doubt this month, maybe next month, maybe at some point this year. I do believe we are going to finish this year around that 330, maybe 335 price points. It could be lower. Inflation is something that you really gotta, keep in mind when I'm making these sort of predictions, because not only do I not have a crystal ball, I have no idea what the inflation rate in Canada is going to be by the end of the year. Now, I want to talk about these surveys, right? Because you're going to see a lot of different, companies and banks talking about these different surveys saying, oh, this pent-up demand, there's buyers that want to come and buy, and they're just waiting for a rate cut. Buyers are smart. And those are small polls. I mean, I look at all of the data about those polls, like 2,500 people, 1,500 people, 1,000 people. These are not polls with a reasonably large sample size of people. And when you really dive into the polls, it's not what it is being made out to be. And at times it can be very misleading. People really should be more responsible with the data that they are talking about. All right, now let's just assume, what if everything I'm saying is wrong? What happens if these prices just keep rising and real estate goes to the moon and things only go up? What happens to society at that point? What happens if nobody can afford to buy a house that lives here? What happens if every single transaction of someone buying a property in any part of Canada turns into an investor transaction? What happens if we become a society of renters that can't even afford the rents? We can't afford to do anything. What happens then? Do you really think the real estate industry is going to matter? Do you think society is going to hold up? And do you think realtors are going to exist? This is a question I would really recommend people in the industry actually ask themselves. What happens in Moncton, for example, if prices wind up hitting a $400,000 average? Do you think Moncton can continue at that pace? Do you really think renters working minimum wage jobs can afford rents at $1,400 a month? Do you think a $1,500 a month basement apartment is actually a sustainable thing in a productive society? And I know this might sound a little bit dramatic, but you got to understand, not everyone in Canada owns property. I'm one of the lucky people that owns property, and it's not because I'm some genius investor. It's because I really, really lucked in on the timing of my purchase. The reason I own a home today is not because of hard work. It's because of luck. It's because of things that happen that were outside of my control. And it is not fair to deny the path of home ownership to multiple generations. It's just not right. People need a clear path to home ownership. And there's multiple different components that form a housing crisis. It's not just about buying a house. People that want to rent or people that are stuck renting should have an option to do so at a reasonable price point. We cannot continue to allow Canada to have our standards of living decline to line the pockets of people who want to exploit people at the lower end of the spectrum. It's simply not right. We have to really ask ourselves, what do we want the future of this country to look like? Do we want a prosperous society, or do we want a society with rising crime rates, low vacancy rates where nobody can find a house, homelessness is on the rise, and drug addictions are on the rise? Do we want these things? Is a rising price of real estate worth the consequences of unattainable property prices. I don't think it is. We talk all the time in Canada about low birth rates. Well, maybe those low birth rates are low because the choice of having kids is not actually a choice that most people can make. These are things that need to actually be explored and talked about. And I would be really curious to see if they could actually do a real survey on this home buyer pool, because I've been doing this a long time. Okay, there are 114 agents in Moncton that have been licensed longer than me. That's it. I know a lot of different millennials and Gen Z and people even younger than that throughout Moncton and New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada in general. It's not a 50 basis point interest rate cut that is going to stir momentum. They can't even afford their rents. They can't afford their student loans. They can't get jobs because the educations that they have paid for and are paying for are not providing jobs. Because guess what? We don't have jobs in Canada. Most of our job growth is public sector. One other thing I want to talk about, and I find this is such a grift. This is such a grift in an industry that is just filled with grifting. Interest rate cuts do not help renters. I do not understand how people are just saying this, okay? I don't understand how Tiff Macklin can say or even suggest that this is something that will in any way impact renters. When you cut rates, you allow the dollar value to decline. And when he talks about diverging from the US and their monetary policy, that is not good. At this rate, I would not be surprised if we see a Canadian dollar that is in the 60-cent range, mid to high 60-cent range of the US dollar. Our government is far too happy spending money, and our central banks seem to be way too content with loosening monetary policy. When you look at the historical interest rates, we were not that restrictive. It was just normal. There are a lot of underlying issues in the Canadian economy. Why would they cut the rates? Well, it's not as simple as they want to stir up real estate prices. The idea is, they cut rates, we'll get more jobs. Didn't exactly happen yet. I don't see how it's going to happen now. I don't understand the philosophy and the thinking that is going into this monetary policy at this point. Part of the reason food prices are so expensive right now is, of course, there's the monopoly issue, but it's also the inflation. Our dollar is worth less, and we are importing food that is more expensive now because we're buying it with a currency that's been devalued. Well, if we continue to devalue that currency, the prices of food are going to go up. That's going to affect renters. When the money that they're being paid is becoming worth less and less, and they still have to buy things like, food and gas and transport, this is not good. This is not something to be celebrating. And a recession is not a good thing. You shouldn't be celebrating a recession. If employment goes up, people lose everything. They lose their housing, they lose their jobs, and sometimes they die. I would really encourage people to watch The Big Short, not because I think that this is anything like the 2008 global financial crisis, but because I believe there's a lot of different lessons that people can learn about the industry, credit agencies, and all sorts of different things involving monetary policy, central banks, and why you should be a lot more careful and consider the motive of the people that are giving you different advice. Be careful out there. This is not the time to be paying all-time high price points on anything.